So this summer, I got the opportunity to go on the Bible Lands trip to Israel with a bunch of other students from NU, some other pastoral and biblit majors. While I was there, I got the opportunity to visit some ancient ruins, see some historical sites, explore downtown Jerusalem. It was an amazing experience that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. I had the time of my life for those 3 weeks. At one point in the trip, I think it was about 4 or 5 days in, we visited this canyon in the middle of the desert that had been formed when a meteor just crashed into the earth a few million years ago. Beautiful location. We get off the bus, we have our camelbacks on, our khaki shorts that make us look like 40-year-old dads, SPF 100 on, this thick a layer on my skin because I'm a ginger. We sit down at the edge of this canyon and we prepare for the lecture that they're going to give us on the site. Now, at the time, I thought it was going to be about a 10-minute lecture or so, and then they would give us some time to explore the site. That's not what happened, and we ended up sitting there for over an hour listening to the guide. It wasn't a problem at first until I really started to feel that gallon of water I had drank start to course through my body. At first I just sort of shifted on the rock a little bit, just feeling really uncomfortable. I crossed my legs. I'm in the middle of the desert. I'm looking for a way out. I'm looking for a bathroom I can use. There's nothing. It's a desert. There's no shrubs. There's no trees. There's no rock formations. There's nothing for me to hide behind, and you can see for miles around. I'm not peeing in front of these people that I barely know. So I'm waiting. Eventually, it ends. And they tell us we can get back on the bus. So I waddle back to the bus, I sit down in the back row, and I close my eyes, and I'm just thinking, 45 minutes until we get back, it's going to be okay. I'm feeling really desperate at this point, but I can handle it. Then I feel a tap on my shoulder. I look over, and there's one of my fellow NU students who will go unnamed, and he says to me, "Hey Tom, cover me." Now, I didn't really grasp what he meant until he turned around from me, hunched over at a weird position, and started peeing into this water bottle. And I had to be there and basically be like a human shield in a cubicle and block anyone from seeing. I guess his desperation was much higher than mine. Desperation is something we encounter a lot in our lives. Sometimes it takes form when there are situations that we don't know what to deal with and we don't have the right resources and we have to come up with unorthodox solutions to the problems. Other times it happens when the circumstances around us just want us to find a way out. Like we just get really desperate. We need a way out. This desperation, this primal drive, is something we experience in various capacities every day, I would say. It's the feeling when the world feels like it's not going to go on unless something changes. It's this desire for the other, some other reality better than our own. And this is where we find the psalmist in Psalm 35. We pick up in verse 1. "Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. Take hold of shield and buckler and rise for my help. Draw the spear and javelin against my pursuers. Say to my soul, I am your salvation. Let them be put to shame and dishonor who seek after my life. Let them be turned back and disappointed who devise evil against me. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. For without cause they hid their net from me. Without cause they dug a pit for my life. Let destruction come upon him when he does not know it. And let the net that he hid to ensnare him, let him fall into it to his destruction. Then my soul will rejoice in the Lord, exulting in his salvation. All the bones will say, O Lord, who is like you? Delivering the poor from him who is too strong for him, the poor and needy from those who rob him." Now, I have to be honest, I have trouble reading this psalm. It's not really something I'm used to. I'm used to psalms that you can turn into a children's song in Sunday school or something like that. This is not really one you can do that with. I'm not saying the psalmist can't write angsty psalms with some dark imagery. Hashtag psalmists have feelings too. But it's odd for me to encounter something like this. When I was young, I was tasked to memorize Psalm 23. It's one that most of us know. And so whenever I read a psalm, I read it in that voice. In that psalm, he's talking about, being led beside still waters to green pastures. His soul is being restored. Even when he's in the valley of the shadow of death, he's not fearing any evil because God is with him. You don't really get a sense of desperation that you get in Psalm 35 as much of a sense of confidence. A confidence that no matter what happens, God is with him and God's going to take care of him. It's like it's seeping off the page. You know, I read it and I feel filled with positivity knowing that God is with me, just like God was with the psalmist. I don't get that same experience when I read Psalm 35. Here the psalmist is pleading with God. He's not really thankful for what God is doing currently in his life. No, he is contending with something fierce here in the present. And he is desperately asking God to help him out. The green pastures and still waters we read in Psalm 23 have turned to javelins, spears, and shields and nets. The comforting rod that we hear of turns into the destruction of the psalmist's enemies. This is not really a psalm of thanksgiving. This is a psalm desperately asking for deliverance. It's assumed by most scholars that both Psalm 23 and Psalm 35 were written by David, of giant slaying fame. He would have had the first-hand experience with God's empowerment and provision in the midst of dangerous circumstances. So these psalms would have made sense in that context. No matter what David seemed to go through, God was with him. I mean, this guy killed a lion, he killed a bear, didn't kill a tiger, so 2 out of 3. He killed a giant, he faced, Philistine armies. This guy was like a poster child for God's presence in his life. He was doing pretty good. However, it's a forgotten part of David's story that I think Psalm 35 would have fit best, and it happens after Goliath. After David gained national fame, essentially, for being a war hero many times over, he became good friends with the king's son, and he married the king's daughter. Now, I don't want to speak for any of the married men in the room. I don't want to speak for Dr. Ziefel. I don't want to speak for Zach, even though he's not here. But we have a stereotype that in-laws are always insufferable, that they're people that are really tough to deal with. I'm going to get married in about 7 months, and I want you guys to know that is not true in my own life. I love my future in-laws. I cannot wait to be part of their family. However, David did not have the same experience as me. David, when he was, in Saul's court, on 3 separate occasions, was almost shish kebabbed by Saul by a spear. On 3 separate occasions. David ended up having to run for his life. He's hiding in these caves in the middle of the wilderness. This is a guy who's, anointed by Saul. This guy has, been a war hero for Israel. This guy has had God with him several times in his life, and he's running for his life. He's hanging out in a cave. David knew firsthand of God's power, no matter what was going on in his life. God still had his back, and he knew that things were going to be made right. He had seen God fight for him in battles against beasts, giants, Philistine armies. He knew God's power because he had experienced it before. But in that moment, these still waters that he wrote about in Psalm 23 were cave waters that he was drinking to keep the thirst off. It's likely that Psalm 35 was something that was written in one of those moments. What I want to say to you today is that if God was able to fight for David in the midst of those really bad situations, how much is God able to fight for us in our situations? David faced many great odds, and in the midst of all of them, God was with him, and he trusted God. There were times where, yes, he was desperate, but he still trusted God, and he still asked him for help. One thing I'm glad I learned growing up is that everyone here has a story. Some of you in this room I know really well, and I've spent time with you. Others I don't know at all, and I've never really had the pleasure of meeting and talking to one-on-one. But each of us has had a worst moment of our life, each of us has had a best moment in our life, and God has been there for all of them, and he's brought us here today. Each of us has a testimony to the power of God. Each of us has experienced what God has done in our lives despite our circumstances. What I want to ask us today is, what are you desperate for? What's starting to make you feel desperate? Are you confident that that God can save us in our situations, no matter what they are, whether big or small, the best news we can get from the story of David is that the same God that loved him and was there for him in his circumstances is the same God that's there for us now in our circumstances. No matter how desperate things may seem, know that God loves us and he fights for us.